So I think we can start, and if people are still joining, then they will catch up. But I just wanted to say hello. I'm Liv Weisberg, one of the co-founders of Collectible, together with Clélie de Beo. And we are very happy to welcome all of our speakers today. It's the second time we do a talk online. Yesterday we had the first one. Usually we have them live at the fair. But this year Collectible was postponed. The physical fair was postponed to next year. And we are instead holding an online salon, which I invite everybody to visit. We did our very own platform where we gave every exhibitor their own booth and virtual space. They can add some text and some videos and so on. So we try to reproduce the spirit of Collectible online. And yes, so I will give the floor to Kristen, who's moderating today for us. Kristen is a curator and also the co-founder and editor of Say Hi To, and she will introduce herself, the speakers, and moderates today the talk.
Thank you for the introduction, Liv. And I'm so thrilled and honored to be here with you and all of these incredible speakers. I've really been looking forward to this talk and hearing what everybody has to say and share. Yeah, my name is Kristen De La Vallière, and I'm American, based in Paris. And I just thought we'd start by introducing the speakers that we have here today, and then I'll introduce everyone and then ask everyone to tell a little bit about themselves, where they live, where they're from. So we have Amanda Pinati, who is the curator at the Stedelijk Museum. She's an art historian and she's completing her PhD at the moment. She's based in Amsterdam. Then we have Simone Brewster, who is an artist, designer, architect, and jewelry designer based in London. And last but not least, we have Prince Juiti, who is the co-founder of Artscape 3437, which is based out of, it is a platform for African design, art, and also a space that is a fantastic resource and kind of learning space, cultural learning space. And he's based out of Bordeaux here in France. So I thought maybe we could start with Amanda, and if you could maybe just introduce yourself in your own words and a little bit about what you do and your experience in the design industry in terms of, I mean, today we're going to be talking about inclusivity and diversity and our experiences in the design industry, and also how we can maybe work towards change, or maybe by sharing experiences, it will kind of open everyone's mind to others' experiences, and we can come to some of our own conclusions of how we can work towards change in the industry. So Amanda, I'll let you take it from here.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so I'm since a year now the design curator at the Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam. So I'm also based in Amsterdam. I am Dutch Indonesian, and we have a new director at the Stedelijk since a year now as well, and he hired me because he also saw the need for change within the museum world. And I think that's really great. Before working at the museum, I was a freelance curator. So I curated a lot of exhibitions everywhere. The last one was actually in Marrakesh for the 154 African Contemporary Art Fair in Palais Bahia, which is this amazing big palace. So yeah, I've been curating lots of things everywhere, but this specific project, which was really interesting because it was all about women, female Moroccan rock makers, so weavers in different villages, and we actually teamed them up with Dutch designers to give more attention to their circumstances, because they mostly are anonymous. They don't earn much for their rugs, but the middlemen and the people that get to sell them, they do earn a lot of money. So yes, I'm always trying with projects also to show these sort of underlying things in design.
I think that's a very important topic and something that I'm very, very interested in. I just spent 5 months in Mexico and seeing the exact same problem with master artisans in a country where a lot of foreigners were coming in, or other local designers, brands, so on and so forth, and maybe earning a lot of money off of work of other people who stayed anonymous. So I think that's a very important topic, especially with what we're speaking about today. So you are currently working on your PhD, researching what Indonesian objects that came to the Netherlands during colonial times, how that helps people self-identify, people who self-identify with being Indonesian in the Netherlands, what those objects mean to them. And I just wanted to know if you could tell us a little bit more about that project, and how, what is the importance of objects in general in bridging cultural gaps or cross-cultural conversation.
Yeah, of course. So yeah, this is my PhD topic that really came from my own interest, which I think always really helps when you're researching something for, let's say, like most people maybe do it in 4 years, but now with my job and everything, I don't really know how long it's going to take me. And this is my first or maybe my second year, so let's see. But I think it helps to be very passionate about it. So as you might know, Indonesia was one of the Dutch big colonies for about 350 years. And only 75 years ago, it became independent. And because of that, there's lots of people that identify with being Dutch Indonesian in the Netherlands. And also during this colonial time, lots of objects traveled from Indonesia to the Netherlands. They were brought by missionaries, but also by collectors, by a lot of different people, and they reside here in museums. And of course, those museum collections, those museums actually was, but before it was actually called the Colonial Museum. It was also made to show like what kind of imperial power the Netherlands had across the sea. But also people in their homes have these objects. And of course, in a home, an object does very different things than an object in a museum. And I'm also looking at young designers and artists that use these objects in their work, or the symbols or the techniques. So these three different domains. And actually in the Netherlands in recent years, there has been way more contested debates on what it means to be Dutch, what citizenship is, or the political belonging of the descendants of former colonized people. And then we have all this colonial museum collection. So if we can say that these objects belong here in the Netherlands, then we might also belong here in the Netherlands, and vice versa. And I think these objects have like a very powerful agency in them that was also given by the makers. And I think these young designers now also can really contribute to that, the sort of reinterpreting these objects and make them more relevant for this younger generation of Dutch Indonesian people that are still sort of struggling, because we have been assimilated really, like we even have been like we're seen as a successful minority, but still we are being very exoticized. So like, what is our place then in this whole story, in this whole history? And I think these objects can really help us understanding that.
Absolutely. And that's really interesting. So is that part of your heritage, is Indonesian Dutch, correct?
Yes. So my father is from Bali. I think lots of people know the island of Bali as a sort of like paradise holiday stay, but my whole family still lives there. And my mother's family is Dutch. So
Okay. And how do you feel, what is your experience? And that's also something I wanted to say, an important thing to share, I think, is not just about, we're three women here in the talk, four, not Liv's here, sorry Liv. We're four women here in the talk, and I think we can talk about differences and gender differences, but I think there's also the intersectionality of all of us have very different experiences as a white woman, as a you know, Dutch and Indonesian woman, as a Black woman, as an Asian and Caucasian woman. We all have very different experiences, even though we are women. So I'd love to also hear a little bit about your experience in the design industry, and how you have maybe think things could have been improved, or maybe just share your experience, and then how, yeah, we can come to some conclusions after about maybe how things could have, yeah, changed or be different or be more inclusive.
Well, I think what is a shame, I think it all starts with education, probably. Yeah. Like, you know, I've studied art history, and of course, I've only studied mostly white male artists, although my university, actually all the professors were white feminists. So of course we also learned a lot of that, but intersectionality wasn't a thing then. Yeah. And I'm talking about when I'm 33 now, so 10 years ago. So, you know, it's not that long ago that this was still a thing. So I think it really starts there. And I think that's where we have to look at that. Universities, but also art and design academies, look at their staff. Mm-hmm. And so it could become a safe space where students feel safe, where they can thrive, and where the curriculum is also really looking at what the world is doing at the moment, what's going on, and really change it to the needs of its students. Absolutely. I think that's where we have to look at first and foremost. And I think what I've been doing in my work, I've always sort of tried to maybe kick a little bit at the museum world or at the institutions. I told you that I don't really want to go into this whole project that I did in India's Design Museum Dharavi, but it was a mobile design museum that we went to the people instead of, like, you know, sitting in a big building and waiting for the people to come. And we were asking, what do you want to see in the museum? And I think that's like the couple of things that I would love to change. And me being a woman in this industry, I think I was kind of surprised maybe that I was a young woman in the industry getting this job already. So I'm just very, very happy with that. Yeah. But I think we have a very long way to go still.
Can you imagine in 2021, we have to feel lucky to have a job? Lucky to have a job to pay the bills, you know? Yeah. I think that's a big thing that sometimes, you know, and I don't want to alienate anyone, but maybe a lot of my male friends sometimes don't understand just having jobs or asking for a certain amount of money is still really difficult as a woman, or to talk about, or so thank you for sharing that. And as a design curator at the Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam, how do you think your role, how do you think that you can incite a change with the role that you have and in the museum format and context? Because I think that's a big one, and you have a great responsibility where you can, I think that you can really make big changes in your role.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if we look at museums, we acquire, we collect, we make collection presentations, we curate. And the museum was always seen as it still is a very powerful institution in that sense. And curators can open gates, but of course they can also keep them closed. So I think for me, it's very important to know what the audience wants and what we want to show the audience. And also in terms of what my PhD is about being able to identify yourself or seeing yourself back in the museum is very important. So not only for the audience, but also for makers and artists themselves. And I think I'm really trying to also make a difference there together with my colleagues. So for example, we're making a whole new collection presentation, because there is one right now that has been there for, I think, like 4 years, but we really want to actually focus on narratives where we centralize makers of color and female makers, where we step away from the idea of a Western perspective, but way more a global perspective. We don't want to only show icons. We don't want to show the art history, because there's not just one art history, but all these different stories. And that's what we're trying to do right now. And luckily, I was also able to acquire a couple of new pieces to tell these different stories, actually. And that's, I think, what my role really entails, to really make sure those gates are open for lots of different people.
Oh, that's so exciting. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think that absolutely that is kind of the future, the direction that we need to go in. And that is something that we're not seeing. And even touching back to education, I know growing up in the States, you know, we only learned about American history, all 350 years of it. Can you imagine? Yeah. Only in a 12-year education, you know, this is, so I think that, you know, this is obviously, there's a huge world with many different people, many different backgrounds, many different experiences. And if we're only learning one of them, you know, how can we expand? And especially in terms of, we'll get to this later, but designing for the people. It's not just one type of person we're designing for, right? But thank you so much. And now I'd love to jump to Simone and have you introduce yourself a little bit in your own words and explain what you do and what your experience is in the design industry.
Okay, hi everyone, hi. My name is Simone Brewster. I'm based in London. I'm an artist and designer. But actually, I think one of the valuable things I can bring is not just being an artist and designer, it's actually that I worked in education for over 10 years. I don't anymore, but I did. Worked at university, and I think that's given me kind of a really interesting perspective on how design grows from, or is seeded into the mind of the creative at a young age, and then affects how they go on to create or feel comfortable with their own ideas going forward. Yeah, I studied architecture and product design, and kind of got into it. I always say everything I've done is by accident, because when I went to study product design at the Royal College of Arts, I done it because I wanted to continue making and exploring. It's a journey I started when I was studying architecture, and I just never went back and carried on making stuff. So that's kind of how my personal journey is. Yeah.
I'd love to hear about your experience in the education sector, actually, as an educator, and also maybe seeing from the inside the way that your colleagues were handling things that you thought, oh, I think we could do that in a different way. If you could tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, I think what's really interesting is, and kind of one of the things I want to point out about this conversation is we're now having this conversation, which is definitely necessary, but we always, obviously, we approach it from the designer perspective, but the reality is design is part of a wider society. We're a group of people who do a thing, but we exist in a society that's already there.
Yeah. So
we often say, oh, how can we do this differently in design? And actually what we're really asking is, what's society doing wrong and how does it affect design? That's really the question, isn't it? So I feel like I was lucky to have the role I had. I was the curator of my own course, and it meant that I could really engage with students and kind of nurture them. And many of my students so I taught at university, but there was another course that I ran that was kind of in, for when you're doing your year out and developing a portfolio before you go off to do your main thing. And that was really my baby. And I had people from, lots of people from the Middle East, lots of people from Africa, a few people from the UK and some from Italy, but mainly from Middle East and Africa. And I really set up projects so that people could design and think about things creatively, but from their own perspective, because that's really my way of teaching, okay? I want people to bring themselves, and in that way they bring in their diversity. So I'd often do a project where you take a personal story from your culture. So you can't come to me with something that we already know. It's going to be, I often say, like, what did your grandma tell you? And I get them to break this story down, okay? You break this story down into the 6 main themes, and let's visualize it, and let's make it into abstract sculptures. So at this stage, we'd have like amazing colors, unusual shapes, because they're all emotional references that they're learning how to visualize. And then I say, okay, now let's design this into an exhibition space. And then it immediately became boxes. You know, it immediately becomes the idea of what we think design should look like. So I was teaching spatial design, and they'd given themselves a whole set of ingredients from their own cultures, a whole set of emotive shapes, a whole set of experiences that they have, you know, linked into their mind. And then when they come and are asked to then produce what is design, they disregard all of that knowledge that they have inherently, all of those textures, all of those colors, because what they're taught that design looks like, or to be a designer is. And instead of adding something to that conversation, they look at what's there, they don't see themselves. And so they disregard all of that, all of those ingredients, all of that thing that can nourish the design world is then left. And I felt that what my role was to let them know that those things were okay.
Yeah.
And how do we use those ingredients in an appropriate way? Because it's not, you know, there's a design brief here. We are still designing a space, and we are still thinking about how we're going to interact with those things and how it's going to be functional. But it doesn't have to look like this. You know, design isn't just Le Corbusier. You know, he was great, and we forget that he's over 100 years ago now. So we should start thinking about what other ingredients are valued and should be represented at that table. That was really my kind of learning from being an educator. And it meant that whenever I'm in an educational sphere, it just like makes me extremely aware that we have to make people feel that their own individual cultures are of value.
Yeah. Well, I got chills. Thank you for actually sharing that. You know, I had no idea. And I think that's something that I hadn't necessarily thought about before, and is such an important point. You know, like that must be so difficult for so many different people that feel like their experience or, you know, vision, or maybe they haven't even gotten to that point yet of understanding what that vision is, because of all these outside influences. And so thank you so much for sharing that. And it's really interesting to hear your approach as an educator of how to kind of tackle that and address that and empower and give agency to these students to develop that.
Well, something that I think is interesting now, when we have these conversations, and I kind of, I'm aware of it, but I became more aware of it when I started to think about the conversation we're going to have today. And I said, isn't it so lucky that now I have a vocabulary to actually talk about these things? Because I think Amanda was trying to point it out when she was saying, I was studying this 10 years ago. It's like, I'm older than you, Amanda, unfortunately. I was studying this 15 years ago, 20, you know, I was studying this a long time ago. And one of the things that this morning, I was thinking about what we would discuss, because I didn't know what would come up. And it reminded me of something that a friend of mine asked me whilst I was studying architecture. So I was around 18, let's say. And she said to me, in all sincerity and honesty, this is what I think we have to be open to. She said, aren't Black people interested in design? And I was like, what? She said, yeah, like, there's no one on this course. Like, there's only, because there were only me and 4 other people of color, one other Black girl. And so she was like, there's no one else here who's Black. They don't care about design. And I thought, I didn't have the vocabulary at the time to actually say what I could say now, which is like, we talk about the idea of even saying, we all say representation matters. That's a nice little Instagram nugget that we have. But I wish I could have said representation matters. What I said at the time was like, well, when I think of it, I think that when I look forward, Black people know that they can be a singer, because we've heard of like Beyonce and Michael Jackson. And we know we can be runners because we've seen that. But I don't think it even crosses the mind of a lot of people, because at the time, You know, how many Black architects were there? I can name you David Adjaye. And, you know, it's like then, so it's that kind of thing. Representation matters. And it doesn't just matter going forward. It matters at the level of, that I said before, like it matters when I'm bringing myself to the table and asking for my creative ideas to feel valued. First, they have to feel valued to me.
Yeah.
And actually that's what representation does more than what we initially expect. Let's say like that.
Absolutely. Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that as well. I think that that is something, you know, that's also something that I've crossed my mind, you know, at the beginning of the Black Lives Matter movement. I started doing a lot of reading and trying to learn as much as I could about others' experience, and seeing different statistics thrown out, like in architecture, for instance. I think it's only 2% Black in like the entire industry of architecture. And my first thought, as that's not an experience, or that's not my background that I understand, is, oh, why are there not more Black people that are interested in becoming architects, you know? And so that's, I think, something really great to hear from you and from your experience, why that is, or why that might be, you know? Definitely. Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm also aware of that. I mean, I think we can go forever. This is the most interesting topic, and we're all learning so much, but I'm going to quickly jump to Prince to make sure that we have time to talk to him. But thank you so much for sharing that with us, Simone. Hi, Prince.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm good.
I was just wondering if you'd be able to introduce yourself in your own words and tell us a little bit about what you do, your background, and ArtScup 3437.
Yes, thank you. I'm Prince, the co-founder of ArtScorp 3437. ArtScorp is an art powerhouse for Africa, as we like to say it that way, which means that our aim is to serve and give a voice to artists and designers from the African continent and its diaspora, who have been historically underrepresented within the Western market. We also work with artists and designers who are not originally African, but who live and create works on the African continent, or whose work is inspired by the continent histories and stories, as there are many. So what else could I say?
No, that's perfect. I mean, and I think, I have to say, I think that this has been, your platform is so needed. I didn't discover it until I spoke to Liv about doing this talk, actually, which is such a I mean, I feel like I've been looking for you for a long time. And, you know, I think also we can like get in these bubbles of, you know, there's times where I'm looking to discover different designers from cultures, whether that be Africa or Asia. And, you know, sometimes we're also in a bubble that's so Eurocentric that it's difficult to break out of, or to be like, how do I get out of this? How do I find something else? And I think that your platform is so needed and brilliant, that we can discover so many fantastic designers.
That's the idea, yeah, really. The idea is really to associate knowledge dissemination tool, such as the database and the media, in order to give visibility to the artistic networks that make contemporary Africa. Obviously, this came from the fact that contemporary artistic creation from the continent are not visible enough in the international mainstream.
Yeah.
The proof is that it takes fairs, galleries, and projects specialized in this theme to arouse the interest of the international community.
And how did you first start it? Oh, sorry to interrupt.
Sorry.
No, I was curious how you first started this. What did you feel was missing, or that really prompted you to say, I want to create this platform?
I'm I'm from Gabon. I was born in Togo and I grew up in Gabon. I'm not French, but French is my mother tongue. And I came to France for my study. I'm from finance background. So I'm not from artistic academic background, but I always had this passion about art and design and culture through my parents and my grandfather. So for me, it was the idea to connect my passion with my background. And I didn't see much of the contemporary African creation while living in Europe. And when I was a student, a lot of people asked me that, so you're from Gabon, do you have artists in there? I don't see much contemporary artists from Africa. Do you know some? And when you go to the museum, you don't see much of these contemporary artists. But we live in the world where we need to be more inclusive, but the discourse are something else and the reality is another one. So yeah, that was and also there is a need for artists living in the African continent to give exposure, to have visibility, because their need is an industry. It's a really burgeoning industry, and they need to get into the international market as well. So yeah, but we need education also. So that's the point of ArtScope.
And that's something that I really love about ArtScope is you have different artists that you represent as a gallery and you sell their work. There's also the media where you have different articles and resources articles about interesting stories of designers and artists' lives and work on the African continent, but also you have a bookshop with tons of books where you can look for African photographers or maybe the history of art in a specific country. And I love that there's really just this 360. There's everything. There's no more excuses for anyone of like, I don't know where to discover this and learn.
It's not perfect, but yeah, that's the idea. The idea is to disseminate knowledge, at least from our point of view, from an African person to give a voice to other African artists and designers. That's the idea.
Absolutely, and in English and French. So
English and French. The main website is only in English, but the media is in French, and we have publication also in English.
Wow, so much work. Bravo. I ran a magazine for a long time, and then I wanted to do it in French and in English. I can't imagine, but bravo. It's really a beautiful initiative, and I'm really looking forward to dive deeper into it after. So now I wanted to open up to a couple of group questions on our topic today about diversity, inclusion, and also we didn't really get to speak about it that much at the beginning. We don't have that much time. We're kind of over time, but if everyone's fine with it, maybe one last question. Yeah, the history of design is an extremely white cis male history, at least what we know of it. And historically, women and people of color have been excluded from that narrative, or even excluded from having any possibility of participating in a formal way. I should have probably said all of that at the beginning of this talk, but anyways, just thought I'd throw it in there when we had a moment. So let's see, because I had a few questions, but we don't have that much time, so let me see which one we're going to go with. Okay, I have one that I'm super interested to hear from a few different perspectives. So design until now has been large, sometimes we don't even realize it, but largely designed around men, but also white men. So I'm going to give an example of airbags, for instance, with cars. Most of the dummies that in the very end are the ones which are tested for cars are of a male body, size, weight, So then a lot of time children and women who get in car accidents, there's a higher fatality rate actually, because it's not designed for women or pregnant women or that size, height, so on and so forth. So what can we do about changing these norms of the standards being also table height, counter height? And I'm sure maybe you guys have a lot of different examples that you know about on your own, and which I'd love to hear what they may be. But also, how do you think that we can maybe change that standard? Or, you know, if there's, I mean, obviously systemic change is needed, but where can we start? Or how do you think maybe you can contribute to that in your practice? Whoever wants to start, feel free.
I think that, yeah, I've heard about those statistics about, it's not just airbags, it's seat belts, it's stab vests for female police officers. I mean, the list really goes on. And what really happens is, I think, even if we have more diversity in the workplace, which is obviously the first place to start, I think that actually what happens is we need to understand that most of us are, when we enter those workplaces, because they're not our own. So it's not that I'm starting a driver's airbag company or a car company. So I'm going to work for established name, okay? And when I go to work for them, in that space, a lot of people become my students. They put on the hat of their employer, and you know, we're always good, like, who is our lead, who's our target audience? And it's very, very unusual for their target audience to be looking like me. Do you understand? Unless it's a cosmetics company. I'm not usually going to be targeted directly, because I'm not necessarily considered to be an economic group that will even be able to buy the car, for example. So there are levels. This is why I'm talking about society. There are levels of misconceptions that can happen, right? So then when I go into that job, I've got that, I'm putting on the hat of my employer, and the hat of my employer is asking to design for that audience. So it's happening on many levels, and the way to break it down is, like, again, firstly, feeling comfortable to raise these points when you're designing. I don't know how comfortable people are, but they have to feel comfortable to do that, to bring about change. And acknowledging that it's there to begin with. Because I think that that's one of the things we get so used to putting on that hat that we forget we're wearing it, and we forget it's even there, and we continue to design in the system instead of diversifying and adding more to the system.
Beautifully said. Thank you. Absolutely. And I think we can all, you know, that, and I think that's also a great way that everybody can kind of maybe approach that in their own practice in a small way. And if everyone feels comfortable and confident to be able to do that, hopefully, though, we have the employers who will be open to receive this feedback. But yes, thank you so much. Amanda, do you have any thoughts?
Of course, yeah. So what you said, that also, I think lots of people are not really aware of this, that this is the case. And I think the museum could again be this sort of platform to also showcase that, like, look, this is what's happening in the world, and how could we change it? And of course, within the museum, we're also looking at this, because of course we don't design the objects that we show ourselves, but we do design the space that we put them in. So, and that has to be, of course, very accessible for all different bodies, also for, you know, so we are also looking at room texts for example, like on what height do you put them on the wall? So for people that might be in a wheelchair, they could actually read them. Or how do we present an object? You can't put it that high that people can't even see them. So, you know, there's all these different things that we try to consider and try to take up in the exhibition design. But of course, we have our blind spots too. So it's always really good that we have this sort of discussions, and we have these debates, and people let us know that they have maybe issues with reading something or not.
That's actually such a great point, and that's something I overheard. I was in Venice last week for the opening of the Architecture and Design Biennale, and all of the not all of, but a lot of the steps for the bridges were covered where you could also a ramp basically. And I overheard a man that was in a wheelchair that's like, finally I can enjoy the city and some exhibitions and so on and so forth because I can actually get around.
Yeah.
And I don't know what it was like before. This is my first time really in Venice and coming to the Biennale, but it was just a thought in my mind. And I don't know if it was the city or the Biennale that installed these ramps, but it was just in my mind of, oh my God, if I was in a wheelchair, I would be stuck on one island. You know, I would be stuck on like one part of the island actually. Exactly. And how important that is, and the accessibility. Yeah. So I think that's a really great point, and especially from the perspective of a curator and working in a museum. Thank you. Prince, do you have any thoughts on that?
I have I was thinking about the idea of design today, that we are seeing a lot of craft and pieces that blur the boundary between I would say art and design. And I'm thinking about in particular of natural indigo dyeing techniques from Mali, or pottery techniques from Mexico, or ancient weaving techniques that that are included in new collectible pieces that are reinterpreted. And it is great to see that. And we see also great, I would say, natural materials such as raffia, clay, wicker, corn leaves into collectible design. Because we are drawn to organic material and earthy material, but it also respond to the contemporary issues such as ecology, eco-sustainability, and responsible consumption. But here's the thing is that sometimes, I'm not saying that we can see it everywhere into the design community, but sometimes some piece of collectible design are based on more contemporary reinterpretation of so-called traditional skills. Very often these traditional skills comes from societies that have long been considered as non-modern and that have long remained outside the large Western market. So designers, I think, have to be careful when they call on these skills into their creation, because they need to acknowledge this savoir-faire. It's also a way to be more inclusive in the design world, I think.
You bring up such a great point, really such an important point. And also these people who are, you know, different artisans and makers that have been working with these techniques maybe for hundreds of years. It can be hundreds or thousands of years of knowledge imbued in this, you know, very worthwhile craft, if also people are wanting to purchase it and invest in it. And I think it's very important, at least what I see from different, maybe I saw a lot in Mexico of Westerners going and working with artisans and paying them nothing and then selling things for a lot of money, and just not giving those people a name, not giving them agency and respect for their work of what they're able, because my thought would be, oh wow, we could make, you're selling it for €2, we could make €80, you could make €40, like wow, actually, like I think it's also the way of thinking of respecting others that have this.
Of course, I think this being said, I think one of the solutions could be collaboration. I mean, honest collaboration. I think great things happen when design pieces are created through collaboration between knowledge holder and artists with a contemporary vision. Sometimes I've seen many brands here in France created by some people who went, for instance, in Mexico, found a nice traditional chair. So they come back in France and they try to make it and sell it. And it's not mentioned that it's from Mexico, there's a culture there. And the same goes for every non-modern places or primitive places, I don't know. So I think collaboration is a great tool, but I encourage galleries to push their designer to collaborate in a more inclusive way with artists from various unrepresented backgrounds. The same goes for brands. If you want to learn how to dye, to use natural dye, you have to go to India, to Mali, to Madagascar. I don't know, you want to learn how to wave raffia, you have to go where raffia is from. You have to go to Madagascar, you have to go to, and acknowledge that. You have to say that in your communication. So this is also part of education, because it will open the eyes of the people. So people will consider other culture, they will value it. And we need this, we really need this.
Can I follow on from that, please? Because that is something that is beyond what you've just said. You've kind of captured something that is so beyond important. And I think it's inherently tied into the Western way of thinking, is the genius idea. Yeah. So what happens, I think, is I have to present myself as a genius. As a genius, I'm an individual who's so intelligent. I thought of all of this by myself. Yeah. The reality is that most of creativity, most of how society has come about to this point has developed because of collaboration. And it's who I can't, this is kind of like an oxymoron because I can't remember his name. He wrote Still Like an Artist. So look that book up, whoever's listening. But he also, in that book, he spoke about, his second book, he speaks about the idea of a genius versus the genius. So the genius acknowledges that I might be Simone Brewster, but I'm friends with a whole bunch of other really clever people, right? That those clever people might even include like people that people don't like to talk about, like my mom, you know, or the guy at the market stall, you know, whoever. And they all feed into my intelligence. And so if I produce an object and I bring it into the world, regardless of whether or not I've made it by my own hands, it's a product of everyone who's affected and put ideas into my head, positive or negative. And it's created by that scene, by my surroundings. And, you know, automatically, by talking about collaboration in a true sense, or acknowledging that an idea has been grown from someone else and you've nurtured it and created it into a thing, you're moving away from a Western concept of knowledge, a Western concept of even like the genius. And I think really we need to try and dismantle that. Yes. The more we dismantle it, the more we empower the local creative to charge £250 for their piece and not be told, well, you're not a designer, and by that meaning you're not a name brand, because actually what the name brand does is they either go and look at what the smaller designers are doing, or they, you know, hire people from university and give them like a little wage to work for a big name. So, you know, no disrespect to bigger name brands, but we have to acknowledge that just because you've got to have the money or maybe the history to have established your name, it doesn't mean that what you're doing is necessarily of more value than someone who's an artisan in a small corner of the world.
Great.
And actually, if we did that, we'd have a lot less, what do you call it, intellectual property clashes, because you wouldn't have small Diet Prada going, this company has stolen the knitwear of Portugal. Why are they doing, you know, these things that they post about? Because they would just feel comfortable to say, we went to Portugal and spoke to local designers. We collaborated with people. They've been knitting for hundreds of years, and we felt that that's why you should be paying these big money for our name, because we've put that research in. Yeah. you know, flip that concept on its head and it actually has value.
I don't understand why people are so brands, or, you know, maybe everyone's kind of seen a call out I did recently that kind of blew up much bigger than I thought it would be, of a French designer who was stealing, you know, from emerging designers or borrowing, copying, whatever. But I just thought, like, but you can make that into a great story, or you have the money to hire that living designer to just do it, you know. And then it's like, from a marketing point of view, if it's about money, if these people don't actually care, at least from the money perspective as well, like, you get to, that's cross, like, you and that designer are going to be posting about it, you and that designer can do an event together, you and the, or artisan. And, you know, I really truly in 2021 cannot understand why you wouldn't credit or talk about when it's an homage, or talk about the artisans that you work with, give them names, tell their stories. That's interesting, especially when you're buying, I think, a piece. For me, I want to know about the person who made the piece. I want to know, when my friends come over, oh my God, when I was in Mexico, I met with this designer, and we met with the artisans they worked with, and this is what they're doing. And like, that's a beautiful thing to invest in as well, I think for consumers. But yeah, just my 2 cents. But I get really passionate on this topic, as we see. I think it's so important. But we've gone quite over time. But I'm going to have a quick look at the Q&A, because I think okay. How can we, as the source of the problem, white males people, provide a shift, democracies to create a balanced opportunity in the field of design?
Yeah, that's a big question, isn't it?
What?
That's a big question, the one you've just asked.
Yes.
The listener. I think first and foremost, just by asking the question, you're taking a step in the right direction, because that means that you're open to understanding that there's more than one voice that can be heard at any point in time. So that in and of itself is already doing the work and making the right kind of steps. Beyond that, I would say he should look there's so many ways you can do it. I don't want to say you should look to the other people, talk to people, look for their experiences, ask them how they can or would like to be aided. You should read, because sometimes people don't want to have to tell you what they want, or they don't feel comfortable with telling you. So there's many ways, but at least the first step is done, that you acknowledge that it's even there. And from there, I think you're already on a path that you can start to do some positive stuff.
Thank you so much for sharing.
I agree. Definitely. Yeah.
Totally.
How can non-white artists get their work noticed? Instagram or similar social media has opened things up to everyone, but you are at the mercy of an algorithm. Influential people and galleries follow or only a certain group of people, and they stay in their bubble, so nothing changes.
Yeah, that's really, that's a good, I don't know if it's a question, because I think for me it's true. We live in a bubble, and what the algorithm do is, like, when you love something, the algorithm is going to give you more of that. So it's like, I think for me, it's a metaphor of the universe. So I'm getting weird now. And if you love this cat, and then you're going to see a lot of cats. And we see only what we want to see. And this is the story of the social media. So everyone has to take his own responsibility and question themselves, and to look at outside of mainstream, and to educate themselves, because the algorithm is not going to do that for you.
Exactly. I think that's also really the job of the curator, to always dig deeper, ask more people, ask people that they know, and then just go on and on and on, and just don't stop. Yeah.
Totally. I'd say that I kind of agree with both of those answers, actually. I think we have to be engaged with our own education. So, Amanda, you're a curator and it's your job, but actually it's my job as a human being to curate what I engage with. And I'd flip it on its head, actually, Prince, because what I found really tough when I was studying and when I had graduated from my master's was that there wasn't any way for me to plug into that network of other creatives. So I remember I curated a show for the Royal College of Art called RCA Black, and it was a way that the college wanted to celebrate its previous graduates and encourage more people of colour to apply. And what I found was a kind of a backlash taking place. And that was such a discouraging thing that it kind of pushed me out of that activity for a long time. And what I realized is the advantage of people coming up now is you can go on the internet and put in hashtag Black creatives and you're going to have a bunch of Black creatives. So in the same way that you're completely 100% correct, and I see that the algorithm can marginalize and can feed the people who are only looking at one thing to continue seeing that. It also can connect you with a community that would otherwise be hidden. And by doing that, it means that we are empowering ourselves not to require the old gatekeepers. So I can curate a show. Guess what? If I'm clever enough, or if I've nurtured the people who want to listen and engage with me enough, there will be an audience for it. And actually, that's the real problem that the Stedelijk has and every other big museum has, is that, guess what? If you're not engaging in the right way, people will go and find it now because you are no longer the only gatekeeper. And that to me is actually the most positive, refreshing, encouraging thing. Because at the end of the day, we can, fingers up to the algorithm, because we will find a way to get around it and connect with who we want to connect with, what we want to connect with, what we want to support. And in the end, that's where the money will flow. And that's where, museums might come 10 years later because they might be late, but it won't stop people anymore.
Definitely. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think that's a really good point. Yeah. Okay, very quick, last one. I work in design for a Western government and I'm a person of color. I aim to highlight the importance of diversity, but at the same time trying to build my career and adapt to the norms and culture of the institution. That balance gets harder the more I advance. What is a good way to stay connected and not lose the momentum to inspire change and increase diversity? Very good question, Mo. Thank you.
Big.
Yeah. A lot of really big questions.
Yeah.
I think it's almost, I would break it down in a different way. I'd say you have to ask yourself what you're trying to achieve and what's the best position to do that in. So maybe it's good to work for the government now because it's great. It means you have money coming in, it's good for your CV and and that enables you to start your own business that you can then not be so concerned about those other things. Alternatively, if that isn't something that you can foresee, maybe you have to be realistic about what you can achieve, because another thing that I don't think people who aren't of colour realise is that you can take on a lot of jobs that aren't your jobs. So after a certain point, it's not your job to change the government. That's slightly bigger than you know? And if we accept that, we can go home and sleep at night without always being frustrated and dying of a heart attack. We can actually stay in our positions longer, be more effective, and know when it's not really about you, it's about the bigger system. And then, it just actually makes you more effective in your job. You can always refer back to yourself and refer back to your culture, but it's not always your job to do that, actually.
Thank you so much, Simone. You always have eloquent answers and insightful answers. Thank you so much. Does everybody feel like their questions were answered? Yes. Prince is so wise. Important point, Simone. Thank you. Perfect. Yes, thank you so much to everyone who joined us, and huge thank you to Amanda, Simone, Prince, for sharing your time and your insights with us on this super important and interesting topic. So I really can't thank you enough, and thank you so much, Liv, for inviting me to moderate. If anybody has any last things to say, yeah, voila.
Well, I guess we're all frustrated that even though we went half an hour over time, that we already have to say goodbye. I would have actually liked to prolong, and we can actually have other talks at other moments. And now we've tried for the first time this online formula. We can actually do it again and with new people. And yeah, so I echo what Kristen said. It was great to listen to you. I've learned a lot tonight, and I really think we should continue this conversation.
Definitely.
In a way or another. And I want to say also, I mean, as a co-founder of Collectible, we also really wish to have more designers and galleries coming from a more diverse background. So we were very happy when Artscop applied. And I think it's something we really need to work. I mean, everybody has their own responsibility, and it's also our responsibility to reach out more. We try, but it is also something that we have very little designers from a diverse background applying, like very little. So it's also something we would like to address and change. But thanks a lot, everyone. I wish you a lovely evening. And for the ones who join later, Collectible is this year only online until Sunday. You'll find the address salon.collectible.design on our website. And we also have some events happening in the galleries in Brussels and also around the world. Some galleries are hosting their booth. They were planned for Brussels in their galleries in Barcelona, in Copenhagen, Milan, and different places. So check our website. And yeah, thank you again. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Everyone.
Bye.